Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, or whatever platform you're listening to us on, as I always say, thank you guys so much for all of the support, all of the things that you've sent to me, all the things that you've sent to the show. Keep that coming. Really appreciate hearing from you guys, and I love hearing all of your suggestions for topics and conversations that I get to have with guests. And one of the things, and I was just talking about this with my guest before we started, one of the things I really like to see and take a part in and hear from other coaches is executing, those so-called special plays, those baseline out of bounds plays, sideline out of bounds plays, those kind of gotta have it situations where you have to execute something in those tight situations. I love hearing, everyone's ideas about that and kind of seeing how people, are able to make the most out of those situations. So I thought it'd be a really fun idea to have a whole episode about it and talk about, what kind of goes into, making sure those plays are run correctly and how you can work on those authentically and practice on those sort of things so that you're ready for them and your players are ready for them when the time arises in a game. So that's what we're going to get into, the idea of executing special plays. And of course, I do not do this alone. I'm very happy to be joined by my guest today, who has just informed me that bit of a name change now where he's at. He is the head coach at Grand Island Lutheran now. Very happy to be joined by Coach Steve Spiehs today. Coach, again, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing real well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Coach, let's jump right in with introduction to you, Coach. Go ahead and talk to us about this great game of basketball. Where has it taken you? Where's your coaching journey taken you? And ultimately, how have you ended up where it is that you are right now at Grand Island Lutheran?
All right, real good. Well, like I said, my name's Steve Spiehs. I'm the head boys basketball coach at Grand Island Lutheran High School, home of the Lightning now. This is year 27 overall for me. I've coached boys and girls at every level from 8th grade to freshman, reserve, JV, and varsity. The most out of all of those levels, I was JV coach for a long time and a varsity assistant. In fact, this last season, out of all my years, this was my first year as a varsity head coach. So it's been a realized dream this last season. I've been a part of 5 state tournament teams, 1 state championship team, and a state semifinalist team. Several conference champions and runners-up and district runners-up. I've been blessed to be able to coach in all 4 major classifications in Nebraska, A, B, C, and D. Currently, I'm a high school ag and skilled and technical sciences teacher at Grand Island Northwest High School. So I teach in one school, but I coach in a different school. I started in 1998 in Neely, Nebraska, way up in the north, about 2 hours north of here. And then for 15 years, I was in North Platte, Nebraska, which is about 2 hours west of here. And now I'm here. So, I graduated high school in Wood River, Nebraska, which is about 20 minutes to the west of here. And I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 1998, which is 2 hours east. So the only direction I haven't lived in my lifetime is south of here. 2 hours south of here would be Kansas, basically. So that's that's the only direction I haven't lived in my lifetime. But I have 2 daughters, ages 19 and 21, and they've been right by my side through a lot of this journey. And I'm currently engaged as well to a lovely lady. She's also a teacher and a coach. So we have a lot.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have a lot in common that way as well. So.
Oh yeah, what a journey. No, that's to have such like experience in so many different ways. There's a couple of questions that I'm just curious about now hearing about your journey. The first off is, you know, what advice or maybe advice isn't no, advice is the best word. With all of your experience that you've had as a varsity assistant, what would you say for maybe a head coach who's listening? What could or should potentially that head coach do to kind of make the most out of that varsity assistant? How can they make sure that varsity assistants on their staff is contributing in a meaningful way, that they feel involved, that they feel engaged? How can those head coaches make sure that they're really using those varsity assistants to the best of their abilities?
Right. I think delegate is a key. I really felt like uh, I've worked under some assistant and with alongside with some head coaches who really did a pretty good job of that. I wore a lot of hats.
Hmm.
Um, anything from at times student doing a lot of things that student managers would do to watching film and doing stats. And that whole thing has changed now. If you're familiar with Huddle,
Hmm.
and those programs, but I started doing stats with Notebook and VHS and Play and Rewind and all that kind of stuff. So, but um, like when it comes to practices and games, I'd say give an assistant scout team responsibilities, or if you're have them run a team while you're scrimmaging, and that sort of thing. And um during games, like my last season a few years ago with Northwest girls, I called uh inbounds plays during games,
Mm.
like what we're going to talk about. I called blobs and sideline plays, in game situations, and felt like that was a pretty cool role. You feel like a coordinator, in that sense. You know, you try to dial up something that might work. So I think any type of role that you can give to that, to the assistants. I was also kind of our director of operations, and that was a title given to me by our head coach at the time. Social media.
Yeah.
Have an assistant run your social media accounts. Um, I kind of was our liaison to the mom squad. Who's got food this week, and
Yeah.
any questions they might have. Those sorts of things.
No, that's cool. It's always cool to have like something that I imagine that like you are, personally responsible for, that, you are in charge of. I think having that like level of ownership and being given that sort of, responsibility does, really empower. I'm sure, an assistant really does make them feel like they're valued and trusted and have, a big, responsibility for the success of the team.
Exactly. It's that's part of that is biblical. You're supposed to you're supposed to have a mindset like a shepherd of the flock, and you might be a hired hand, but you have to always be thinking about what's best for the flock. And
Mhm.
I had a head coach tell me one time. I was the JV coach and varsity assistant, but he said, um, there's going to be accountability, and I don't want you to worry about your job, but at the same time, do what's right and do what's best for the team, and we do want to win.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I mean, after that first season, boy, did I ever go to work and be like, okay, how can we improve and get better? And I poured myself into, where did we fall short, and what do we need to do, and those sorts of things. So I think his that's those experiences just made me better too, and they would make any assistant better too. So,
Yeah.
but
No, awesome, fantastic, Coach. Before we jump right into this topic of executing special plays, I know that you also are passionate about man-to-man defense. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what you see as the keys to running a good man-to-man defense, and what goes into teaching your players how to run one effectively.
yeah, so I for somebody who loves man to man, I run a lot of zone, but I still, even with that, you can't run zone effectively unless your kids know man to man principles, and so For teams to play a solid man-to-man defense, it comes down to three things: being able to see, being able to talk, and be able to move. Um, Seeing is about great vision of the ball and their man. You got to be able to see both, right? And it may not be appropriate to, we always say guns up,
Oh yeah, yeah.
or point, at least you can still point, point to the ball, point to the man, place yourself, in the middle, get your hips down, that sort of thing. Drop, instead of turn, you drop so you can see both. Um, Talking, is about playing five people against the ball with a vision, okay, plus your voice. Okay, so here's where you add your voice to it. You
Okay.
you got to talk while you're pointing. You got to be whatever your language is in the version of man that you run. So I like to I like to say ball gap help. We're playing that way, yelling out screens. Um, yeah, and then moving. Moving is about getting hands up, working your feet, jumping to the direction of the pass, or you might say, some coaches might say jump to the ball, cut off or jam cutters, getting over, under, or through screen attempts, closing out on shooters, getting in the way of drivers, closing out defensive possessions either with a charge, a steal, a block, or a rebound. You know,
Hmm.
um, I it drives me nuts when we play defense for 34 seconds in the shot clock, and on the 35th second we don't get a rebound.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff turns a guy's hair a little more gray. So
Yeah. Uh, do you find the process of teaching communication in man-to-man defense, is that something that is difficult? Is that something that takes a while for players to understand? How do you just to follow up on that, really emphasize that your guys are talking, communicating, and playing together as a team on defense?
right. Yeah, I think the more that you can stress, hey, it's five against the ball, and you don't have to you don't have to hug your person. Whether it's if it's like you coach girls, you don't have to hug your girl. You know,
Hmm.
it's all about the ball. And stress the ball scores. The ball is the power. You gotta want the ball, right? And you can't do it if you're hugged out on your guy or your girl out on a wing and the ball is on the other side of the floor. So we stress helps, playing help side defense. Um, we play pack line, or that's the style I like to play. And some people, they still like to play, deny, and you're in the passing lane and that sort of thing. Sometimes though, I think it depends on your personnel. You know, I think playing pack line, for example, I think is easier for young people to rotate in, especially maybe that maybe they have to think a little less and they can just play. That's probably a good way to say it. Whereas sometimes if you're playing deny and everybody's out denying and then you got to rotate, then that might be tough in some cases. So I try to make it as user friendly as possible and as simple as possible. And it comes down to just knowing your role depending on where the ball is and rebounding it on a miss.
I like that, five against the ball. I think that's it's a nice way to think about it. I imagine like players, thinking about it that way, like, that sort of, mindset or reframing it that way kind of makes them think about it maybe in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Right. And you're going to say during a scouting report or that scouting report review time, you're going to say, okay, hey, number 22 is a shooter,
Hmm.
or number 5 is a driver. And then there's things you can talk about. That's when you talk about, okay, getting under or over screens, depending on what they are. But if they don't have the ball, you know you there's still an element to, maybe you don't want to get so far away from them, for example, but there's still an element where you still have to play team defense, unless we're
Hmm.
you're playing a junk or something, and it's a box and one or something. But nonetheless, there's still that element of communication you have to have, and the ball still scores. So maybe instead of 5 and 22, maybe 32 gets hot because you're so focused on 5 and 22. So unless everybody's doing their job, it doesn't matter what you're playing. Everybody's got to do their job and know where the ball is.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Coach, transitioning out into the topic of executing special plays, let's kind of go through some of the more common situations that obviously a coach or a team is going to face. So one of the first ones, obviously, that comes to mind for a lot of listeners, I imagine, are blobs, the baseline out of bounds plays. So obviously, there's a lot that will vary depending on time and situation and what it is that you're trying to specifically accomplish, maybe even depending on who you're facing. So I'm going to ask this kind of in a general sense about what are you looking for in a good baseline out of bounds play? What have you found are the actions that have really led to the most success? And I'll start with that as my first half of my question.
Sure. And, first and foremost, there's three phases to the game, just like football. There's three phases to basketball. There's offense, defense, and special teams, and the blobs are the special teams, and you got to be able to execute on offense, and you got to be able to defend them on defense. Just like any other time of the game. So I really have learned how, or not learned how to, but learned to stress uh, the importance of being able to execute those plays. Now, does it always happen as much as we'd like? No, but it's fun when you read the stat report and you see a high percentage of execution, when it comes to those plays on your stat sheet. So what do I look for? I like something that's a quick hitter, something that develops quickly for a score in a matter of a couple seconds, something with some misdirection. I found this. I ran across this today. Just as a matter of fact, I get this newsletter from BLOB and Hood. I don't know if you've heard that. There's a
No.
lot. There's a lot of them out there. BLOB and
Okay.
Hood, BLOB and Hood newsletter at gmail.com. I get this newsletter and it says three principles I live by, and I'm going to use them to audit our current plays as well. I'm going to adopt this. The three principles that came out of this newsletter are simple beats complex, multiple options beat one, and start the same and end differently. So I'm gonna go back and review all the plays that we have and just kind of make sure that the multiple options beat one, that one sticks out in my mind because I think as coaches we get so used to making sure that like our first option gets executed so well that we might tend at times not to focus enough on that backside, So even if the backside is a screen or if the backside is a curl, you still want your kids executing that part of the play just like they would if they were on the ball side of the play, because a lot of times, at least I know our competition figured out our ball side of the plays pretty well over the course of the season, as the season went along, and now it's time to really ramp up. What are we doing on the backside to maybe catch somebody off guard?
So with that, now to add on to the second part of that, now what is kind of the process of teaching your guys? I know for me, it's always was something, especially when I first started coaching, about how to meaningfully kind of run these and execute these in a way where girls in my case just weren't going through the motions. What kind of goes into actually implementing them and teaching them and really making sure that your players kind of understand what they should be getting out of them.
Right. Um, you know, I think, well, like I was telling you before we started, I just had a small team this year.
Yeah.
We weren't even able to, with the exception of they made it, quote unquote, legal for us to be able to use managers for practice players. And so there were nights, especially earlier in the season, when we were actually to use 5-on-5. And so then I would have them be our defense, especially for those inbounds play situations where we'd have to be able to execute against a live defense, and I think going from there, I think you can play games with it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I in fact, there's a Concordia University here in Seward, Nebraska. They run a team camp every year, and part of their team camp, it literally counts it towards your camp record, is a special plays game where it's you against another team from another school, and you have to be able to execute. I think it's like 5 out of 7. It's like the best out of 7 in a series of special situations, and that's the game. That's the whole game. So you get a turn and they get a turn, and then whoever scored or didn't or whatever, then you go on to the next one, and you might be down 2 with the ball and a minute left, or you might be up 5 and uh, you know 30 seconds left, and you got to be able to execute and so forth. So I think there's things that
That's fascinating.
yeah, it's fantastic. They've done it for years and continue to. They've been doing it since the early 2000s and probably even before that, and they still do it to this day. And it's something that I think we can all just, if we're just all intentional about you know incorporating that as we can, or making it a priority and just do it every time or whatever, during our own just individual practices. I think everybody's going to be better off for it.
Yeah, no, that is something, Coach, that I don't know if I've ever heard of something like that before. I mean, you talk about being able to, really like sharpen and refine, these very like specific aspects of the game and everything. Like I can't even imagine how much, players must get out of that, being put into, the very unique kind of situation with those kind of constraints and specific requirements to it.
Right. It's really pretty fun, and when you win that game, there's a special little feeling you get from when you win that particular game at that
Yeah.
during that team camp versus the other ones. I don't
Yeah.
know about it, but I think
Yeah.
there's a mental toughness. There's a mental toughness that goes with executing inbounds plays, and I think it's really, that's why I think it's so satisfactory to me to have, for a team to have success, and to be able to execute. First of all, those are the types of things that get noticed, in games. Like, oh man, they just get the ball in. Sometimes it is just about just getting the ball in. You want to just get it in without anything happening. You want to be safe, but a lot of times it's about, hey, it's deflating every time if you score at a high percentage on inbounds plays, uh, that's 2 more points, every, or 3, you know, uh, a lot of
Hmm.
times in just a matter of seconds. Maybe it's at the end of a quarter, maybe it's at the beginning of a period, maybe it's you're capping off a run or you're starting a run, and it's deflating when you're hard to stop. The other team kind of hangs their head if they think, oh man, they scored again on another inbounds play.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially like because it's such a situation where it's like the other team like knows you're setting something up, right? Maybe especially if you've already had like success of a couple inbounds plays, like, oh, now I got to defend another one of these. What are they going to do this time and execute? Then they
Right.
hit it again, and it's like, oh man, like we can't stop it no matter what it is they try to do, sort of thing.
See, that's why I like that third point from this newsletter. Start the same and end differently.
Yeah.
I like to start. I like to start in a box set and then run multiple plays out of a box. Some teams they like to line, but whatever you do, some people go 4 across. But I think whatever you do, I was told years ago, actually, um, by a football. It was when I was in high school playing football, and our high school coach said, it shouldn't matter. We should be able to give them our playbook and us have their playbook. The difference is we still have to stop each other. So if you line up in a 4 across, set every time you run an inbounds play, so be it. Just get really good at it. Get really good at running 2 or 3 plays out of that set, and you're going to be hard to stop. If you set screen, if your team is a team that values being able to set screens or values being able to get the most out of a misdirection, you're going to score a pretty high percentage of times.
Yeah, and especially when you have you know teams that are, oh, they're in this formation. We know exactly what it is they're going to do out of it, and then you put a new wrinkle or there's a new like element to it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, we thought we knew what they were going to run, but now they have all these other things they can finish out or go into. It makes it that much more unpredictable, even if it starts in the same formation.
Right. And I think you're exactly right. And I think along with that, um, it's something I need to continue to be more mindful of too, is don't get in a rut with the same player, always getting the shot out of your play. You know, have eh, run your plays, especially like in practice, uh, with a different player getting the shot. You know,
Hmm.
because if you can find yourself a couple players who are good at hitting threes, or if you can rotate your posts, and if your inbounder is the one who is ultimately going to get a shot on the play, have it be a different inbounder, a time or two. That way you rotate players getting shots, and if they know that they're going to be called upon to get a shot every once in a while, that's going to help them to become more invested too. Other than as opposed to, oh, I'm just going to set the same screen every time. As valuable as those are, sometimes you got to throw your kids a bone once in a while, and if especially if they can hit, just as well utilize that.
And I imagine for, game like execution of what it is you said, it's important that, all your players are meaningful, engaged in running, that play, because I think it's going to be pretty obvious if, you have players who aren't, maybe selling out for it or really acting or cutting or moving an emotion for them to actually score, and it's only one person who's really, emphatically like trying to get open or score for the basket. They're going to zero in on that one person, knowing, okay, that's who this play is meant for.
Yep, definitely.
So with that, it's kind of transitions to how are you working on those baseline out of bound plays and also those sideline out of bounds plays? How do you kind of integrate, making sure that all of those are being worked on in a practice? Obviously, there's tons of things to be working on in a practice, tons of things you need to do, but you can't be, obviously neglecting those sort of things. So how do you kind of weave those into kind of a practice plan and making sure that, you're putting meaningful time in so that the players are ready in a game?
Right. So, um, yeah, we set up specific time, to focus on inbounds plays, and I'll say, okay, let's run these plays, and maybe it's early, when they're fresh, but also sometimes it doesn't hurt to run them later, when they're tired, and you get the fourth quarter, everybody's going to be tired on both sides of the ball, and you got to be able to think and execute, so I think practicing those situations does a lot. Also, whenever we scrimmage, you know um, we always tell the players, hey, we're not us, we're coaches, we're not refs, so but once in a while, you call the okay foul on the shot, and you practice free throws that way, or hey, maybe you really didn't quite see who hit it out of bounds, but maybe, hey, it's white ball underneath, run, this play, and they got to be able to run it, and execute it, and such, and sometimes, are there times when you were like, oh, and sometimes you stop, and you'd be like, nope, run it again,
Mm.
sort of thing. That's not going to happen in a real game, but that's why it's called practice too at the same time, right? So, there's things that you can do in practice that you can't in a game, but at the same time, you want to make it game like, and have that little bit of added pressure, that little bit of added, intensity.
Yeah, and your players, I imagine, probably get a lot of benefit out of that, like knowing that like it's going to be a situation where they won't necessarily get bailed out by, no fouls or everything. They're going to have to earn everything that they have to do. And I imagine that makes it's meaningful because, those things aren't necessarily going to be called in a game even, right? Or refs aren't necessarily going to be calling everything, or they're going to miss something. So, putting them through a little bit of adversity, I'm sure only helps.
Yeah, that's I was privileged to be an assistant coach with North Platte St. Patrick's when I first moved to North Platte before I was with the public system. And when we would run 2-minute drills, that was, those special situations when you got to drive the field in 2 minutes,
Hmm.
our kids too would be like, what? Maybe coach would say, oh, penalty or this or that. And then they'd be like, what are you talking about? And he'd be like, no, don't argue. You don't have time to argue, that sort of thing. And so this is the same situation. You don't, basketball is so back and forth,
Yeah.
that you don't have time to dwell on a mistake or a sometimes a call even. It's always got to be the next play, you know, and especially when you're trying to execute an inbounds play, you may not agree or you may disagree with what just happened, but you got to execute a play now because you got to continue on with the game. And so it just goes with what you were just saying about um, you know a lot of times, uh, unless there's a situation where there's a timeout called and you draw something up for an inbounds play, a lot of times inbounds plays are just okay. You got to go with it. Go with what the coach calls and execute it. So
Yeah. Are you are facing a lot of different situations that you need sideline out of bounds plays for? I'm curious about what you need to be prepared for and the types of situations and things that you find yourself in where you're running perhaps different sideline looks and needing different sideline looks. Kind of talk us through what you're seeing as happening out there during games that
yeah,
that and what sort of sideline out of bounds plays you need to be running.
yeah, that's a really good question. I think sideline out of bounds plays. I don't. I'm wrong on this thought, but they're probably not as focused on as baseline out of bounds plays are.
I'd agree.
Um, just in general, in terms of what we need to be prepared for, just regardless of where we're running the play at, um, you find teams play a lot more zone on the in terms of their defensive set against your inbounds play, whether it be out of or whether it be underneath or on the side, and so that can add to the level of frustration a little bit. You know, what am I going to against? They're just going to stand there. They're not going to switch. They're not going to chase. Per se, they're just going to stand there. So sometimes that can be a little bit of frustration, but um, I probably tend to run a line more from the side. Sometimes we run a box set and just screen across. This last year, I actually found myself running like a half court offensive play when we had to inbound the ball from the side because it involved getting a guy open on talk about different options. It involved getting a guy open on a baseline screen, and it involved getting a guy open on a double screen at the top of the key. So you give yourself different chances, different options that way. Um, and those are a little bit harder to defend. You find yourself gambling and guessing as a defense. That way, where's somebody going to come open from? Um, Sometimes when you got to go to the other end of the court, uh, you know, you always want to, in my opinion, you always want to get the ball the direction you're going to go. You don't
Hmm.
want to, if your basket is on the opposite end of where you're inbounding the ball from on the side, you don't want to go backwards. Um, the majority of time that leads to a trap or that leads to a steal and a layup, sort of thing. So anything you can do to go the direction of your basket is key. You know.
With something that you said, Coach, that I wanted to pick on because I'm always looking for new ways to improve on this, and so I'm gonna uh, pick your brain a little bit about a lot of coaches, including myself, when it comes to running baseline, sideline, out of bounds plays, really emphasize, needing screens. And I'm always curious about ideas about how to get players to set more meaningful, to set better screens, to, really set them with a purpose and spring somebody loose. So are there any, teaching points or things that you really emphasize to your players on setting screens effectively?
Well, I think when you try to, I think when you practice screens, like when you practice your offensive, uh, drill group work or drill work, however you, whatever term you use for it, like early in practice, I think that's the key, to get your players to set good, solid screens when you're just focused on that. And then fast forward to whatever time of practice it is when you run in your inbounds plays, um, especially from the side when you're a little more spread out. I think
Mm,
that's when you say, okay, we did that drill where you set screens. You've got to execute. This is why, because you've got to be able to execute in this moment. You know, um, especially like I said, especially in space when you're a little more spread out and you've got to get in somebody's way, so that's where way back then in that group work when you're teaching them how to set a screen in the first place, you're focusing on, you know if it's chest in the if it's chest on their shoulder, or if it's setting a back pick, or being solid and not moving your feet, whatever you're emphasizing. um be a headhunter. You've got to go get, and a lot of times too, kids get hung up on um you saying, okay, this person should be here, so go
right.
set the screen. And so then all of a sudden they're going to a spot instead of where that player is. I, I bet I'd be a really rich man if I had a nickel for every time
Yeah.
somebody go set a screen on air, because that's where
Yeah.
that's where
Yep.
the play was going to be versus where their defender is.
Yeah. Been there. Been
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So I think those things, just constantly reminding them, set the screen where the player is. Don't set it at a spot, because uh it's kind of ridiculous when it happens.
Yeah, but I think we've all been there though, right? Like we've
Yeah.
all seen that. Yeah. Um, so when you're in that tight situation, coach, where you're like, all right, we need a basket, we gotta draw something up, we need a basket. Uh, how not only is it not only am I asking you what is it you're looking to execute, but also how do you kind of teach the mentality of remaining calm, remaining focused,
Mm.
just being ready to execute what's needed for that situation? What kind of goes into the whole process of coaching and executing those tight, need a basket situations?
Yeah. um One time I called a play. I came over to this, had it was a timeout. It was in a double overtime situation, and we just needed one more basket. um I just tried to remain, I myself tried to remain calm and explain things as calmly as I could, and was tried to exude as much confidence as I could as I was drawing the play up.
Hmm.
And I think it was actually a situation where I had two timeouts to burn, so I went ahead and burned that second one too, just to overemphasize and redraw. And the kids actually executed it perfect. If I had it to do over again, I'd have placed somebody else setting a screen and somebody else as the shooter. That was my mistake, and I think I put a little bit lesser experienced player as my shooter, and they wound up not making the shot. Whereas my more experienced player, I wanted a solid screen set, so I had them be the screen setter and not the shooter. So that's one of those things you learn from, because I think even in that moment, I think the nerves got to my shooter. You know, but
Yeah.
other times in not so tight situations per se, but yet yet kind of. Um, if you're playing against a team with a little less savvy, you know, you don't have to you don't have to run the play that maybe you necessarily drew up. For example, one time I remember running a play and it was a box set, of course, and then it was just a screen. The baseline, the block players screened back for the players at the elbows, and then the players at the elbows were supposed to come off those screens and flash to the ball, and then whoever came open first was going to score it. Well, what happened was the team we were playing against played this zone, and they wanted to protect the block, so they didn't move on those plays. And so I just had my girl at the elbow stay, and we just threw her the ball and she scored it, and they didn't pick up on that until like 3 times later. So it's just communicating that confidence to your player about, hey, yes, this is the play, but this is what we're going to do because of the way the other team is playing it, you know? So,
Right.
sometimes it's about that too, and just helping your player know that, hey, you're on the same level as them, you're on the same wavelength, and just being confident.
You bring up like a really good point though about and the part that you just mentioned though about the confidence because players I've been in these situations before where players can really tense up in those situations. And I've been in, situations as a coach where I can like see it on my girl's face where they're more concerned about not making a mistake versus executing what we're trying to do. And they'll get gun shy or they'll get a little timid or they'll get a little hesitant when the ball's in their hand. And, as a coach, I think it's really important that we really, emphasize that we have confidence in our players. And even still, I think then I'll let you, kind of elaborate if you've been in that situation before about, even if the play doesn't work out well or if the shot doesn't go in, that we still felt confident in that player making that shot. And, sometimes it goes in and sometimes it doesn't go in. I think keeping players' confidence high, even if it doesn't get executed or end in like the perfect result, I think is pretty important.
Oh, completely, completely. I've had to remind players, both boys and girls, good things happen when, Sally shoots the ball or when Jimmy shoots the ball. The great majority of times, whether one thing that typically happens will be the shot will go in. And if the shot doesn't go in, we're going to get the rebound and put it back, or we're going to at least get the rebound and have that possession saved.
Hmm.
And that's where if you have a good backside rebounder, you know, uh, getting that board off of a miss and either getting a putback or being able to get it and kick it out and saving a possession, that's especially where your team is going to come together closer in those situations because they know that they have each other's back. And so just because Sally happens to be the shooter in that situation and misses, keep your head up because, hey, Susie's going to get the rebound and put it back. Or if Jimmy misses, Johnny's going to get the board and kick it out. And we're going to have the ball again for another 35 seconds, that sort of thing. So, um, uh, head up next play, you'll make it next time kind of a thing. And if you don't, we'll play on.
Yeah. Yeah. And because you're going to need that player, right, for the next time that they're being called upon on that situation. You want to make sure that their head is up high and their confidence is up high because you'll probably be in another situation. We're going to call on that player. And if they feel that their coach supports them, then hopefully it's going to lead to, a better result the next time that, they're being called on.
For sure. And also too, along with that, sometimes a player they want to be the they want to be the shooter every time. uh,
Yeah.
and it's not good. That's on the flip side, that's not always good either, because maybe they're drawing a double team, and maybe the other team is really keyed on them always being the shooter, and you just have to let your players know, hey, listen, because you have the hot hand, we might go to you, or if they're going to key on you, you can take that defender elsewhere, and somebody else is going to be open. So there's a little bit of that. You don't want to stifle that confidence, but at the same time, if they're getting frustrated, you have to say, okay, hey, listen, we're going to call somebody else's number this time, and spread the wealth a little bit for the sake of the team.
Yeah, that's also true, right? Like players need to know, like, hey, that this may not be, you at this particular moment, and it may be somebody else. And I think that goes back to the whole point of, executing these meaningful, baseline out of bound plays or sideline out of bounds plays where you talked about, you can start in a certain formation, but you need to have a lot of options. And sometimes, that option may be the third, leading scorer, the fourth leading scorer that you got on your team, because if everybody needs to, make a meaningful movement on that baseline out of bounds play, then the ball may get to that third or fourth option, and that they might be the one that needs to be ready to execute at that moment.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Something I'm kind of curious about what you see, Coach. You touched on this a little bit, this sideline out of bounds play, but I'm curious about when you're executing your baseline out of bounds plays. Are most teams running a zone against it? What sort of defenses do you kind of see yourself going up against when you're designing your baseline out of bounds plays? You're running them. What defenses are being thrown your way?
Yeah, that's I kind of touched on that earlier just from just a moment, but yeah, that we're seeing a trend in a lot of teams go 2-3, against trying
Yeah.
to defend a baseline, especially a baseline out of bounds play. Um, Very few stay in man anymore. The good man teams stay in man, but even sometimes they'll go zone just to switch it up. Um, but I don't mind it if a team goes man on us on a baseline out of bounds play, because then I can we can run more picks, and we can
Right.
more things designed for that. Um, but otherwise, yeah, that's the trend I see. So then you got to come up with different things to kind of be original, because there's only so many out of bounds plays you can run against a zone that aren't unique. So I'm just always trying to look for, like I said, misdirection, or making that defensive gamble pay off in our favor as an offensive team. Maybe they gamble wrong and we wind up scoring, that sort of thing.
Well, you bring up a good point that I think sometimes as coaches we can try to outsmart ourselves or try to, do something that is really elaborate or never been done before, never been seen before. But sometimes the classic things, work, and the basic motions work. And you brought up something earlier too about how, you know, depending on the situation, just getting the ball in is perfectly fine. It doesn't always have to be a home run play that
Right.
necessarily leads to a basket. You want it if it does, great, but you don't have to put that kind of pressure on yourself as a coach to feel that every single out of bounds play you have to run, it has to lead to this, scoring outcome. If you just get the ball in and run what you want to, sometimes that's all you need to do on one of those.
Yeah, and put the pressure on the defense.
Mhm.
I use a lot of football analogies for basketball. It's like being on the 10-yard line, and they're the ones that have to keep you out. So when you're underneath the basket, especially, they're the ones that have to keep you out. You should be able to just execute and play loose and confident, and put the pressure on them.
Yeah. And in a way, I would say that when you're running in transition, is an opportunity, of course, for it to be its own like special play if you really work on it and you emphasize your transition movements and really look to get something. So, Coach, curious about what you are looking for in a good transition sequence. If you want to get, a quick basket or something good out of a transition look, what are you trying to look for, and how do you kind of work on maximizing those transition opportunities?
Oh, for sure. Well, a good transition starts with rebounding. If you have lackluster rebounding, you're not going to get out in transition very well, because it's going to take too long. Okay, so if you've got players that are going to go up and get rebounds, once they get that rebound, turn and look, and your wings should be wide, and whichever, if they get the ball, your point guard ideally should be the one calling for it, and then turning and looking and getting it up to those wide wings, you know, and that's what starts a transition right there. The rebounder, the point guard, and the wings getting wide, and getting up the floor. And not turning and dribbling up. You got to turn and pass it up. You know,
Uh,
get the ball ahead. You know, and so I like what we run is wings get wide, pass the ball up. It doesn't matter if you go right or left. You should have a rim runner. If the layup is there, take it. If the wing three is there, take it. But otherwise, then you're gonna have your trailer uh, coming along, coming up from the back. There should be probably a good pick. Probably not the probably not a ball screen, but probably a curl, that sort of thing. Get a good reversal, if nothing comes open right away. But you definitely have it starts with that rebound and getting the wings wide.
what do you do in practice? Do you work on transition looks and opportunities in practice?
We do. We have several options that we just get it up and down the floor. And obviously this year we did it a lot on air, but the guys had fun with it, and it was also a conditioning tool as much as anything,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So sometimes those
Sneak
things
that in there
have
too. Yeah.
exactly have more than one purpose. But now this year, like I said, we'll have more, and so we'll be able to run more regular defenders against it. And so then the guys will see their options a little bit more organically this year, is what I would foresee. Whereas opposed to this last season, it was okay. Run this one now or run this one now. Well, I'm not going to be able to say that when we get it against a defense all the time, because it might not be there, you know.
Hmm.
So they'll be able to see those things way better for themselves, now that we'll have more players to run it against.
Couple quick questions, Coach, before I hit our concluding segment. I was just curious from a philosophical standpoint, getting back to baseline out of bounds play execution. Are you fine either way, whether it's a um, outside shot? Obviously, layups are optimal, but how do you kind of balance, your desire maybe as a coach to get like an easy layup versus to get like a wide open three? How is your, philosophy on that? Have you been consistent in terms of what, shots you're happy with? I'm curious because for me, like I love getting layup looks, but I know that it's not always going to happen, and I've worked a lot more on, getting more spacing out of my baseline out of bounds plays. I'm just curious, kind of your, philosophy, how you balance, those two separate looks.
Yeah, I've got a 6'5" kid this year, and so um, we're definitely trying to focus on getting a few more inside looks for him. But he and a couple of the other players can also hit from outside. So if I'm setting one of those guys up for a three, I'm totally fine with that. If we're setting our big guys up for a paint look, I'm fine with that. Probably if you asked me to put a percentage on it, um, because a lot of the defenses we are running blobs against are going to be zones, we're
Hmm.
probably running, a 60-40 uh, 3-point shot look to an inside shot look type of ratio, percentage wise. But um, I'm fine with either, as long as we score, or give ourselves an opportunity to score. Maybe we get a look, and it ends up in a drive and a foul, and maybe we're shooting free throws, or maybe we're inbounding it again, and I can run a different one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or you run something else. I mean, I've been there where you're running
Right.
out, two free inbounds plays in a row on different sequences. So no. Hey, having a 6'5" guy though, I imagine that there's different, wrinkles or different things that you might be able to implement that you wouldn't otherwise when you have somebody with that sort of size. I guess depending on the teams you're going up against and what sort of size they have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it's been fun that way.
And then on the other end, when you are on the defensive end on defending against, these sideline or baseline out of bounds plays, how do you then, take the knowledge you have of what you want to do offensively and then try and like put them in reverse engineer it, I guess, and now you're on the defensive side defending another team. How do you kind of work on stopping other teams when they're, running their actions?
I think there again, your base tenants have to be the same. Butts to the baseline. Don't give up anything easy. But yet, if you know that, well, just random. If you know that number 22 is a shooter, you know that you got to get out on them. Kind of a thing, and that goes back to your defensive principles of talking and closing out with high hands and that sort of thing. Um, you don't chase a screener, that sort of thing. Probably if we're playing man, we tend to switch those things a little bit more in a blob situation,
Mm,
just so we don't get caught chasing, those sorts of things. So,
yeah.
but
So go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's uh I guess if a discussion or an internal monologue that all coaches have of like, hey, like how do we specifically, stop a specific action that we think this team is going to run or that we've kind of scouted for, and like we think we know what it is they're going to run versus what you brought up of like, hey, these are our defensive principles. We'll focus on what we always need to do defensively, and we should be okay with, whatever's kind of thrown up against us.
Right. And sometimes it's okay, they're going to get their big guy open for a screen and or he's going to screen to make it look like, oh, he's just a screener, but he's going to come back. So
Hmm.
if you're on him, don't chase him away. He's going to come back. It's just, and it's about communication and help, in those situations too.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that I used to be, and I probably still am a little bit, but I definitely used to be somebody who would maybe like overanalyze other teams' baseline out of bounds plays, and I would try to like call out exactly what they were going to do, and I was, try to get all my players in these right positions, and I think that I've kind of adapted over the years and just trusted, my girls and just said, hey, like, you don't need to know every single potential move or step that they could do. Just I trust you enough because I believe in you as a player that you know what to do defensively as a person. So whatever is going to be thrown against you, I trust your ability to, react and play defense against it.
I think that's an excellent point. I commend you for that because there are coaches. I worked with a coach at one point who did, like you said you used to do, and as part of the scouting report it used to be like a packet, and high school kids don't look at that, and B, there's paralysis by analysis, and you don't want that. You just want your kids to, like you said, keep it simple, trust them that they know your basic tenets, and just go play.
And I think to kind of add to that too, what I think it also does is kind of shows, I imagine, confidence in your players. And I brought this up before that if you believe that, hey, if we execute what we need to, then we don't have to, have a 100-page packet about what the other team's going to do because, hey, just execute us and we'll have them play us versus us having to worry about playing them necessarily.
Exactly. Yep, great point.
Awesome. Oh man, this hour's flown by, Coach. So to wrap up, there's a couple of questions I love to ask every guest. So I'll just jump right in and go ahead and start with this first one. Thinking back on your coaching career, what is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think by sharing our listeners would be able to learn from?
Yeah, I think listening to the voice in your head when it's telling you to call a timeout. I think if there's a any moment that I wish I had back over the course of my career, it's those times when I should have called a timeout, either to save a possession or to prevent trouble from happening. You get, maybe one of your players is getting a little heated, and when they wind up getting a technical, and you could have maybe prevented that. Even though they need to prevent themselves from doing that in the first place. Um, One time, I could have saved a possession. Actually, I could have saved a win for us if I would have called a timeout. Instead, I didn't. And a player, she had gotten the ball and she had a bad habit of picking it up and putting it over her head, and the other team would steal it. And
Hmm.
uh, she got the ball, and I should have called a timeout, but I couldn't get it done fast enough. And they went down and scored and went up, and we wound up losing the game. So it's just, you wish you had those moments back. Sometimes you just gotta call the timeout.
It's always tough, right? I mean, it's funny, like one of my moments though is like when I did call a timeout and I wish I didn't. So,
Oh,
we always go through those, right? Where it's like
yeah,
I think I still, struggle with that. I think a lot of coaches do about, you don't you need to, I think it comes down to just knowing your team, right? And knowing like, okay, we need to settle down and we need to call a timeout in this situation versus need to let them play. And, that's always it's always tricky. If only we always knew when exactly to call timeouts or not to, right? Be a lot better coaches if we always knew when those moments were.
well, definitely. And I think too, real quick too, I think it doesn't hurt to be over thorough. I remember distinctly one time when something as simple as I had this girl run through some screens and she
Hmm.
ball right where we wanted her to, and she would have had the shot, but I forgot to remind her to shoot the ball. And a defender was kind of closing out at her. And had she went ahead and went through the motions of shooting the ball, she would have been shooting three free throws. But instead, she hesitated and got her shot blocked. And
Oh man.
the buzzer goes off. And I'm like, I forgot to tell her just to shoot.
Yeah.
And that's in their kids. So you don't think that you should have to tell them those things, but in the end, it's better to be over thorough than to not be, and then have that happen.
That just reminds me really quick of a situation of previous guests talked about a couple years ago about, players having that taught in them sometimes about being too robotic or having to go through like certain motions all the time. And I remember a guest talked about how he had a player who uh, got into an action, had a wide open layup, and then like kicked it out to somebody out in the perimeter. And the coach was like, "Well, why'd you do that?" He's like, "Because the play was I was supposed to drive and then kick." He's like, "But you were wide open," and like situations where you're just like they like, "Oh yeah, the ball's supposed to go in the basket though." So you had the opportunity to do it. Like, no, do that. But no,
Yep.
yeah, that's definitely a memorable one for sure. Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest what I like to call a 60-second soapbox. You can go over 60 seconds. I just like to put titles to things, but I like to
Sure.
use it kind of as a platform for you to get out kind of a final message, a closing thought, a closing idea, something that you can leave the listeners with. You could take it any direction that you want, basketball wise or coaching wise. It's your soapbox after all. So, Coach, I'm just going to go ahead and open up the floor here for you and just let you take it from here.
Oh wow. Okay, I appreciate this. Very interesting. Um, I was thinking about what to say on this, and I think the biggest thing is be a great teammate. I think that a lot of times, players, they go out for the sport for a reason, and they play team sports for a reason. But I think it gets between popularity nowadays with social media, maybe family or parental influence. Everybody wants their particular player to be the star and do well. And I think it's important for the players, especially the players themselves, to remember, hey, I'm still part of a team, a unit, and I have to do whatever my coach needs me to do. I have to do whatever my team needs me to do, whether that's a shooter or being a great supporter vocally, or being a great screener or a great passer in any given moment, being a great defender. Just be that team player that you can be counted on to when you get your minutes, whether that's the most minutes in a game or the least, to give great minutes. And that's when you'll shine. That's when you'll get that attention and those props that you're looking for. It's the ones who give poor body language. It's the ones who you know, only go full speed when they're going to get the shot, and not when they defend, or not when they are called upon to set a pick. Those are the ones who trust is really easily lost in players in those situations, and that's when teammates know that hey, we can't always count on this person or that person for this, because they don't always go hard, or they don't always have a great attitude. That's when dissension in the ranks comes about. That's when you see your playing time decrease, and then people wonder why. Well, how come my kid doesn't get in? So to avoid those negative situations, just give 100% all the time. Think of others above yourself, and just be a great teammate.
Well said. I couldn't add anything on to that. I love that. I love the body language part in particular, and I love that's really well spoken, Coach. Really appreciate you coming on here talking about a whole myriad of things. Your coaching experience, defense, obviously executing of special plays, baseline, sideline, transition, all those need a basket situations, and of course just general coaching and making sure that your players are ready for those clutch situations. I really do appreciate it. I'm excited to continue to follow along with your journey and see where your young team goes, especially with the new logo and the new name change and then the whole new everything that you got going on. So that'll be exciting to follow along with. So Coach Spiehs, again, thank you. Appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing you execute and have your players execute some game winners maybe this upcoming season.
Yeah, I hope so too. I appreciate the support.
Appreciate you all. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.